Hi, this is Mihai. I'm a volunteer with Ontario Regimental Museum. I'm more specialized in the Soviet hardware of this museum, in particular the T34 and the T54, as well as the BMP. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the T34 and how it came into being and on the battlefield. So talking about tanks, we have to think of how they originated. And the beginning of tanks comes from a battle in World War I, which is called Cambrai. This battle proved that a certain amount of British tanks can punch through quite good resistance from the German army, create quite a serious havoc behind the German lines, and create an opportunity for the British to advance. Unfortunately, funny enough, actually that didn't happen for the British because they were taken by surprise of how quickly the German defense collapsed. But in the same time, that provided a lesson. And the lesson was a tank force has to operate as an independent force, and it has to be quite mobile. These lessons are basically represented in how these vehicles were built afterwards. The constructions of them or designs of them was based on that, on those experiences learned in that battle. T-34 is actually a vehicle that is in line, so to speak, with another vehicle called the BT tanks. They got their name BT from the Russian, which actually means VT, because B is V in Cyrillic, and they mean basically fast tanks. These tanks, they got up to, I think the last operational one was the BT-7. Proved to be in a battlefield very handy. They were quick, they were able to negotiate quite difficult terrain, and they seemed to prove a couple of really important points that military minds between the two World War IIs were thinking about it. And one of them was the capability to concentrate a large force of tanks and punch through a weak defense of the enemy, the so-called blitzkrieg, right? Which the Germans so successfully used in World War II. In the same time, in the Soviet Union, military minds started realizing that they need to do something about that. And one specific name that comes to mind is an officer called Tuhashevsky, which disappeared, unfortunately, due to political purging, which is the designer not only of this tank as a concept, but also of a strategic concept which is called deep battle, which eventually in World War II will defeat the Germans and prove to be effective against the blitzkrieg. So let's talk a little bit about the T-34 evolution. In the 1920s, 1930s, they realized they need to come up with a new design. The Soviets had a very simple way of numbering their designs and naming their designs. They would be simply called A-20, A-22, whatever came in line, so to speak. There was no special meaning to it. This vehicle is a direct descendant of another vehicle called A-20. In reality, they created two vehicles, A-20 and A-32, and you would ask yourself why. In that time, a lot of concepts were not proven. And A-20 was still a vehicle that could actually take the track off, so this part here, and still drive on the road wheels. It would still have a steering wheel on the front, which enabled basically the tank to be driven as almost like a truck. The idea behind that was it was considered that the great distances, especially in Soviet Union, would prove fatal to the track system, especially in the winter time and harsh conditions. So they were still experimenting with that kind of vehicles. So A-20 was a vehicle that still had that. So it could drive on road with wheels and on tracks. And they even went so far to take one side, the tracks off, and have the track on the other side and still see if it's operational. They drove some of them for 100 kilometers in this configuration. Then in time they realized it's actually a little bit too complicated, too much engineering, way too complicated for a vehicle that needs to be mass-produced and needs to be available in high numbers. So based on the same tank, basically, they designed the A32, which, except for the steering, the so-called steering road wheels, it was identical to the A20. And that is the basis of the next prototype, which is called A34. Funny enough, it's actually the T34. The T34 was based on the A34 once it passed all the military requirement and all the problems that the military wanted solved on the vehicle got solved by the engineers. So that would be, very shortly and very generally speaking, the concept of this vehicle. The person that is usually attributed with the design of this vehicle is a character called Mikhail Koshkin. He was quite a talented engineer, according to some, that managed to pull the resources and managed to convince a lot of people in Stalin's circle, which, by the way, it's not an easy job, to understand that this is a viable concept. And he was actually right, because the Germans were quite terrified when they first came in contact with the T34, because German officers were professional. They realized really quickly the potential of this vehicle. Lucky for them, in the beginning of the war, Soviet officers were so poorly trained that that played to their advantage. But soon enough, the Soviets learned to use the T-34 in quite lethal ways. And that proved fatal for the German army in the long run, and eventually, together with the Allies, obviously, that defeated the Nazi Germany.